Hi, folks. Jeffrey Daugherty, Christian Whistleblower, still at it. I was asked if I had anything on RH negative. I knew that I didn't have anything current, but this is really good. This is from 2012, back from the Christian Whistleblower archives. And this is with MD Dr. Matt Herbert, a fascinating discussion on RH negative. I just listened to the whole thing, cleaning up the audio. So it's a nice listen for you. It's very, very interesting. It's very, very enlightening. And again, it's coming from a doctor, and a doctor with a very well-balanced point of view. So I hope you'll appreciate this, and I do hope that you'll consider becoming an unindoctrinator. I can use your help. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and go ahead and give a listen now to From the Christian Whistleblower Archives, the RH Negative Riddle with Dr. Matt Herbert. Here you go.
Tonight I have my friend, Matt Herbert. He's with us tonight to talk about the riddle of RH negative blood. And, I've been in the spiritual / religious realm for quite a while. And until Matt mentioned the riddle and the rather staggering ramifications of RH negative blood, I had not heard of it before. And it's actually somewhat remarkable to me that there was something of this great import that I really didn't know anything about. And, of course, he's only told me the very little bit of it, and I've just taken a little bit of time to research and poke around on the World Wide Web. So what I have learned is fascinating, and what I have learned is one of those things that just makes you want to scratch your head and say, are you kidding me? And I've known Matt for quite a while. Well, it's been, I guess, over a year now. We've I had a lot of time to have some nice chats, a lot of them on the top of a bridge looking out over the Gulf of Mexico. So we've had some nice settings for a lot of our talks. And Matt has the distinction of being the very first repeat guest on the New Covenant Kabbalah show. So we obviously like him. We enjoy spending time talking with him. And I'd like to welcome him to the air now, to NCK and Friends, my friend, Matt Herbert. How are you, Matt?
I'm real fine, thank you.
Good, good. Well, this is not quite as nice as standing up on top of the bridge having a talk, but it's not too bad either, is it?
This is not bad. It's not bad. I'm sitting down feeling comfortable.
Good, good. Now, Matt, as I mentioned at the beginning, when you, I think we were talking on the phone and you brought up the subject of RH negative blood and the rather staggering ramifications that go along with it, I had never heard anything about it before. Of course, knew of RH negative blood, but didn't know about any of the rather interesting circumstances surrounding it. When did you become aware of something unusual about RH negative blood? What were the circumstances surrounding that?
That is an excellent question. I began to take an interest because of an article that was published in Scientific American, and it showed the distribution of RH negative blood in the world, and the author, a very prestigious scientist, said, and this distribution has no political overtones at all. It's completely neutral. And I looked at it, and there was Northern Ireland and Scotland with one frequency of blood, and there was England and Ireland with a different frequency of the RH negative blood. So I wrote him and said, actually, this is flash powder. This is really, really. He never wrote back, but that got me to thinking, where does it come from? Where's it going? What's it do? I have learned things and believed things that I later found not to be true, and so I cannot guarantee I won't find out what I think now is wrong, but I'll tell you my current understanding.
Well, that's all we can hope for, is to look at things and pick things apart, study them, and sometimes we get down the road a little bit and we look back and ask ourselves, my, what in the world was I thinking? But I think, Matt, the most important thing is that we just keep thinking and keep trying to learn and keep trying to discover. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Shall I kick it off then?
Yeah, what I'd like you to do, Matt, is just kind of take the reins and go along and share with us what you have. And, at times if I have a question, I'll pop in there and ask it. And if we get some questions stacked up from our listeners, I'll wait for an opportune time and check with you and see if we want to address some of those, okay?
Sounds good to me.
You have the floor. Go ahead, my friend.
All right, thank you. There's a couple of, there are, I suppose, three directions from which I've had input on this. One is the hard science. The other is the wildest, what I would call superstition, and the third is my own interpretation. Let me start with the bad stuff first, because get that out of the way, because you may have heard of this. But there is, we have different types of blood, and one type is A and B and O, and then there's Rh positive and Rh negative. Yeah, and you're either an A, B, or an O, and any one of those you can be Rh negative and positive. We'll ignore the A, B, O. I have a friend who's Rh negative, and she's been scouring the internet to find out what she can about about beliefs on the thing, and it turns out people believe that people who are Rh negative are reptiles, aliens, visitors from different planet or dimension with very sinister intentions and so forth. And she's just a doll, it wouldn't hurt a fly. And she's a little bit upset that there's so much hostility out there. Of course, people make occasions.
I'm assuming she wouldn't eat a fly with her tongue either.
I would think probably not. I'm not even sure she could catch one with her tongue. I'll ask her that next time we communicate.
Okay.
Well, having heard all this, I've snatched up a pencil and paper, did a little arithmetic. And among people in the United States who are of European extraction or African, either one, the frequency of the Rh negative gene is rather high. There are more Rh positive genes out there than negative genes, but in order to be Rh negative, you have to have two negative genes. It's dominant genes. You have positive, you're positive. Well, it turns out that most people, except for perhaps recent immigrants in the United States, are most people who are Rh positive carry at least one Rh negative allele. That is to say, all those Rh positive people who are prejudiced against Rh negative people, most of them are half Rh negative themselves without knowing it. So it's one of those little.
Very interesting.
So don't let anybody tell you that they're aliens. Well, we may get back to that. But at any rate, the dark side of Rh negative is this: if we were all Rh positive, the gene would be of no consequence. We'd get along fine. If we were all Rh negative, the gene there'd be no problem. We'd get along fine. You get in trouble, though, when you start mixing the genes. Just this one gene. Mostly you talk about inbreeding, and you don't want to crowd genes together. That's very rare for the find hidden genes that way. It does happen, but the Rh positive, the Rh negative gene is extremely common. And if you mix Rh positive with negative, you can get a situation where the mother, her body identifies the fetus as an invader, as an outsider, and tries to destroy it.
I have heard that. So is that if a mother is Rh positive and the fetus is Rh negative?
It's the other way around, but the
other way around.
It's the difference that's the problem. The positive means it does have the Rh thing attached to the surface of the red cells. They found it injecting rhesus monkey blood into rabbits and found the rabbits could be made allergic to the rhesus monkey blood, and that was the Rh factor. And some humans have it and some don't. Apparently,
right.
all rhesus monkeys have it and no rabbits or something like that. Anyway, it's the positive father and negative mother combination that gets into trouble.
Gotcha.
Takes a while to mount an immune response. Generally, the first fetus is fine. It's a nice, healthy baby. But the second one and later ones, there is a very high risk, almost inevitable, that they will be, if they continue to be Rh positive babies, the mother will damage them.
Wow.
And the damage, for some reason known only to, well, certainly not to me, the antibody that the mother makes to attack this foreign substance can get through the circulation into the fetus. There's something called the placenta that sticks to the wall of the uterus and exchanges material with mother circulation, and the antibody against the Rh factor can cross the placenta. Else there really wouldn't be a problem. But cross it does, and when it gets in there, it starts breaking down those red cells, the fetal red cells, thinking, well, not thinking, but responding as if it was infection or something.
Right.
So we're breaking down the fetal red cells. That is releases hemoglobin into the fetal circulation, which doesn't do any harm right away because the hemoglobin can cross the placenta just fine. And so the hemoglobin is pulled out of the fetus and detoxified by the mother's liver without the slightest difficulty. I mean, she has the metabolic reserve to mop up all that damage. And so the fetus, if it's not too bad, during fetal life will be all right. But after he's born and no longer has mother's liver to fight for him, it's up to his own liver, which isn't that effective. And meanwhile, those antibodies are still destroying his red cells, and that dumps free hemoglobin into his system, and that gets into the brain, and that damages the brain frequently. Now I'm saying as if it happens now. Modern medicine's got this under control. The one thing that I treasure about civilization is they can treat that and they can prevent it, and it goes away because it's so awful. I will go back to hitting mammoths with a stick any old day, no problem. Wouldn't mind that at all. But I wouldn't want to live in a world with Rh problems and no modern medicine because it gets a lot worse. Okay, the fetus just had his brain damaged. Within living memory, before modern medicine got its teeth properly into it, that was so common that most of the people who were permanently in the institutions in the country were there because their brains had been damaged by Rh incompatibility. Extremely common.
No kidding. Most of the people in
institutions,
mental institutions, were there because of trouble with Rh negative incompatibility.
Yep. More than everything else.
That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
Matt, somebody asked a question before we get too far away from the fetus. Michael asked a question. Does that happen in fraternal twins? I mean, do you know of anything of it happening with one twin being, having the allele, one twin not, or any of the ramifications that could come from that?
Excellent question. If they're identical twins and both the twins are Rh positive and the mother's Rh negative, it will damage both of them. But if one twin is Rh positive and the other Rh negative, then there won't be a problem, because as long as they're in the uterus, the mother's taking care of them. When they come out, then they're no longer no longer sharing anything. So the Rh negative baby, he didn't have any problem with those antibodies anyway. He didn't have any Rh positive sites on his red cells, so he's not getting hurt. He's not getting any hemoglobin from his twin, because that was all going to the mother, and now he's on his own. But the other twin is vulnerable to it. Good question.
Right. So most of the people in institutions that, and within memory, at any rate, were there due to problems with the Rh gene. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, mixing genes. Everyone tells you, oh, you don't want to have inbreeding because there's this awful prejudice against inbreeding we may get to. But the incompatibility itself is caused by mixing genes. Just those specific genes. It's not a general principle necessarily. But those genes, you get positives and negatives together, and you get, my old civics teacher in high school said, up in the hills, go to a cemetery, and here's this guy's tombstone, and there's his first wife's tombstone, and a half a dozen little baby tombstones, and the second wife's tombstone, and a half a dozen baby tombstones, and a third wife's tombstone, and a couple of three baby tombstones. I mean, it wasn't just once. This happened frequently.
Right.
Positive man keeps marrying RH negative women, and the thing is that, of course, obviously at the extreme, it will kill the fetus. You do too much damage to the brain. But worse than that, really, because the mother's still taking care of the hemoglobin. The fetus becomes anemic. He does not have enough red cells. He goes into heart failure, and just like an adult, they used to call it dropsy, means high drops. People's legs used to swell up. The medicine's pretty good at giving diuretics and empty out the extra fluid in the tissues. But in the old days, when you went into heart failure, which of course was very common, heart disease always been a big problem. Then you swell up. Okay, fine. You swell up, but it's not good. The lungs fill up with water. Well, the fetus doesn't have any problems lungs filling up with the water, but when he gets too edematous, when his tissues are swollen, it's hard for the mother to deliver him. And
sure.
Right, okay, so he's swollen, so he doesn't come out. Guess what? It's the 1800s. You don't have modern medicine. You can't safely operate, or maybe it's the 1700s, and you can't operate at all. And now it's stuck, and now you lose the mother. And that is the dark side to the whole thing. I mean, losing babies is real bad, but boy, when you lose the mother who's already got a healthy baby, and she's otherwise perfectly healthy, all she ever had to do was divorce that husband, marry an RH negative man, and it all goes away. She's completely fine for the rest of her life as far as that goes. Never been done. No one's ever done that.
Man, what's the distribution of the Rh negative gene in the population? What percentage would you say?
Yeah, good question. According to that map, let's see. I think we got that covered. In broad stroke, east is least and west is worst. The Rh negative blood tends to be congregated around Europe and in Africa, and then tapers off as you go toward the east. So you get off to East Asia, essentially no Rh negative. Then get off to the Western Hemisphere, essentially none, very, very little. It's there, but vanishingly small. The biggest concentration, and 6 hours ago I would have told you it was the Berbers in North Africa, but a friend just called up out of the clear blue and wanted to know what I was up to, and what I said, she said, the highest concentration is the Basques in Pyrenees,
really?
France and Spain. Yeah, I had thought it was the Berbers. I had
heard that actually.
But the Basques have a very high concentration of it. There are apparently the Kurds, the area, the eastern Turkey and northern Iraq, a bunch of people there called Kurds who've never had a country. They tend to be a little bit higher than the background. People around them have more. You see it in the Sudan, way off south of Egypt. There's a slightly higher than background there. Then if you come up through Egypt, you get this high concentration among the Berbers, and then it goes up the east coast or the west coast of Europe, like the Basque country is the highest concentration. But it continues up so that Northern Ireland and Scotland have a higher concentration than Southern Ireland and England. and then that line continues all the way up to the little town Bergen in Norway. So, and it's believed that there was a migration from some place, and the line Sudan up through Egypt, across the Mediterranean up the west side of Europe to Norway, was actually, I used to think that it was that was just where the last Rh negatives were surviving as this sort of flood of Rh positives came in from the west, but apparently not. Apparently the best information I can lay my hands on now, there really were Rh positive people in Europe first, and the Rh negative people came up the coast in enormous numbers. There's one other thing to go back to the
Sure.
unhappy medical part of it. Mr. Charles Darwin, who was popularized evolution, it actually was invented by Aristotle, but Darwin was influential in getting people to think of it again.
Absolutely.
He decided inbreeding was just bad. Well, his own son said, well, that's true. He said, you mean like it causes insanity? Oh, yeah, inbreeding causes insanity. So his son says, good, let's find out. He got together a bunch of records in London and compared the number of people in Bedlam, their insane asylum, with, you looked at the parents and see how often they had the same last name. And then you look at the population in general and see how many people married people with the same last name. And that's not to say everybody who's got the same last name cousins, but it does make you think that there's more likely to be a connection. Well, when the
Sure.
son came back with that, he said, no, actually, if you marry a cousin, the children are less likely to be insane, not more likely. It's a protective effect. Well, Darwin didn't much like that, and nobody does. There's somebody named Allen walked around the hills of Appalachia and collected stories and genealogies, and he was he was the one who actually first realized that if the mother's Rh negative, there's going to be a problem. He didn't point out the father has to be Rh positive, just blamed it on the women. But he found that the insanity had a different name for it in Appalachia, was the numbers. When you sit down with a pencil and paper and do the numbers, you find that the protective effect of marrying a cousin, which is, you're more likely to be the same blood type, aren't you? I mean, you're relatives, you share genes, so maybe you're less likely, if you're marrying a cousin, to marry somebody with a different blood type. You're more likely either to be both Rh positive or both Rh negative than the population as a whole, in which case you'll never have a problem. So there's this protective effect. You'd think people say, oh, well, wow, we can avoid this terrible problem with if we just have enough marrying cousins, at least we can reduce it a little bit. The trouble is that if you have a community where they're marrying a lot of cousins, there are going to be a lot of babies. And the baby stuck in the birth canal problem only happens after a lot of babies. And that's only going to happen with people who've a whole community for generations have been marrying cousins. The birth rate goes up, and now if you do get Rh incompatibility, now you can get a real disaster, and that may have something to do with the phobia people have of inbreeding. It wasn't the inbreeding caused the problem. The inbreeding caused all those, not inbreeding, just optimal outbreeding. The optimal outbreeding, the tight gene pool, caused all those babies, and that's what caused the tragedy. Okay, let's see. Get back to the distribution. Well,
Go ahead.
You probably recognize this pattern. because they discovered, 10, 15 years ago, I think, in the Sudan, they found some stones in a ring. They were about knee high. They weren't very big. We looked carefully at them, and they were the same design as Stonehenge. And they said, this was built by the same culture that built Stonehenge, and probably the same people. And then you go up Egypt, and there's no particular increase in Rh-negative blood in Egypt, but the Egyptians are fairly new. They are all Arabs that came swarming in at the time of Muhammad. You don't have ancient Egyptians now, so you wouldn't expect to see a remnant of an old population. Berbers in North Africa, Malta, very huge number of megalithic structures. And then it just, go to Basque country, or particularly, Brittany, northern France, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. You get all the way to the Faroe Islands, pretty close to Bergen. There are these following the path of this Rh-negative migration, are these enormous megalithic structures, except for one in Sudan, which is pretty small. So it seems quite reasonable to assume that for some reason a group of Rh-negative people decided they needed to build these big, huge stone monuments and committed an enormous amount of resource to it, and built them up along that line. Now, as I said, they ain't aliens, right? Not aliens. Nope. There's most of it.
So no reptoids living in a hollow moon, nothing of that nature.
Absolutely not. Guaranteed. Okay, fine. Go to Egypt. There is a lovely book by a man named John Romer. We know he's highly respected because you see him on television sometimes. And his book is called The History of Ancient Egypt. So it's kind of nice because you see these things on TV and they tend to be just sort of, they just taunt you with stuff. But here he's written this nice thick book all about ancient Egypt. This is the first of a couple of volumes, I guess. Well, in his book on page, I found this today. It looks like page 30. Yes, page 30. There's a picture of a little artificial object that was found in a town called Marimba. They excavated, and the excavation in Marimba started, in the 20s or 30s. They'd gone on a long time. And among the things they found, and it's still going on, among these things they found was this little head. It was the size of a silver dollar or something like that, except it's 3D. It looks just like a gray.
It does.
It does. It looks like a gray. So much so that I don't know when it was found. I have a better idea of when it was put there than when somebody pulled it out of the ground. And it very well may have been discovered, the 20s or 30s. And when people started saying, well, what would an alien look like? They thought of the Marimba head and said, it probably looks like that. And then a little lively imagination got to work. But if that thing has been discovered since Grays first entered the scene, and that would have been the 1950s. I guess Roswell was the first time they began talking about actually having seen the creatures. And I guess they had pictures of them or something like that. Supposedly the autopsy had taken place. Anyway,
I believe they did have, at least initially, before it all went into lockdown, though, that I believe that there were, if I'm correct, I've done a little study on this, but not extensive. I believe there were some pictures maybe of injured grays, if you will, and I think maybe even, like you said, the autopsy. So, at least their form and their shape, maybe if it was just from stories people told, it certainly began entering into the cultural consciousness there in the 50s. Sure.
So if the Marimba head had already been excavated, and people knew about it, and I sure didn't until a few weeks ago when I read the book. Reading everything I could lay my hands on about ancient Egypt for decades, never ran across this thing, and Romer showcases it. I mean, it's he puts an illustration of it and says, okay, this is the first Egyptian representation of a human being. Of course, they have an enormous amount of artwork occasionally. If that had not yet been excavated, things get very, very strange. Good luck finding out when the Marimba head was discovered. There's one other little piece of stuff that I didn't do as careful study on, but it kind of seemed to me, back of the envelope kind of calculations. Of course, we've got a few years ago we had Y2K. The world was supposed to end because the computers couldn't count past 2000, and so everything was going to go up in a fine mess. They fixed it. It wasn't a problem. Well, the Mayans of Central America, they had their own Y2K, and their calendar runs out just like ours ran out, but it is not supposed to run out till this December. And there's supposed to be 3 long counts all of time by their calendar. No one really thought the sun was going to go out in Y2K. We just thought there was going to be a computer glitch. But it's the same sort of thing. The calendar runs out. I mean, what do you expect to happen? Well, when I reckoned back on Y2K, there's a place called Göbekli Tepe or something like that in Turkey. And it, more or less, it's a huge megalithic structure, long before Stonehenge, more or less dating to the time of the beginning of the first long count. Don't hold me to this. Okay, check it out for yourself. Right. My impression was that they built that thing the beginning of the first man long count, and then thousands and thousands of years later, that date is still being remembered in South America. That's the beginning of our calendar, right there. End of the first long count. Well, that was about the time, and the beginning of the second long. That was about the time of Stonehenge, and the pyramids, right? So this whole RH negative triumph swarming up the Atlantic seaboard, building all that stuff. That was happening about the time of the second long count, and the first long count. Long before there was anything that was recognizably Mayan. So you begin to think, wait, this has got a pattern. After that, it ceases to be, there's somebody else came up with the notion that the origin of the Basques was, I believe, essentially the end of it was either the beginning or end of the first long count. The transition between the beginning of the third long count doesn't really count, because by that time history was up and running and something important had to happen someplace.
Right, yeah.
You throw a dart at a spinning globe, and any time in the last few thousand years, where it hits, you can point out there was a great upheaval in that time and place. But Göbekli Tepe and the megalithic RH negative folk, those appeared to me, when I worked at it, to have the timing was about right. Again, makes no sense at all. I can't come up with a theory for you that ties all this together. But this is a correlation, and at least it's something worth checking out with play around on the internet and see whether it works for you.
Right, it is. It's very, very interesting. Now, did I hear you to say that about the time that the pyramids were being built in Egypt, the RH negative folks had come up there? Did you say that, or am I just interpreting that incorrectly?
That's my interpretation too. I think of the RH negative people. I mean, how can you build a Stonehenge in Sudan, a Stonehenge in England, megalithic structures all the way down. At the same time, they're building the pyramids and not get involved. I mean, at the very least, you'd expect sidewalk foremen. I mean, they're putting up these big stone things. That's what we do all the time. Let's watch them. Yeah. I think there's a very, very strong implication that all the pyramids are historical, and the megaliths are prehistoric. That it had to be part of the same phenomenon. And it may have been the same people. They may have been building these things, and they went around to the Pharaoh and said, "Hey, we went to build these great big stone things." And he said, "Yeah, well, all right, sure. I've got some money to spare. Can you build me a really nice pyramid, or anything you like?" "Okay, we'll do a pyramid." And they may have been instrumental, rather than saying that Egyptian culture had gone as far north as Norway and the Faroe Islands, because there's distinctively Egyptian that doesn't make its appearance over there, although it kind of makes a bit of an appearance in the New World.
Interesting. Why do you have any thoughts in your mind as to why these RH negative folks were so want to build these megalithic structures?
No, I don't. I have, however, I once did a little study. This was totally illegal. I should have gone to jail for this. This is human experiment. This is research on humans, so don't tell anybody, okay? But,
well, let's hope the statute of limitations is run out.
Oh, yeah, right. Managed to get some college students to fill out some questionnaires. And, just, okay, what do you like? How do you act? How do you deal with things? And, what are your preferences? And what's your blood type? To see if I could extract anything consistent about the RH negative people. And there isn't anything that you can demonstrate statistically.
Nothing jumps out at you.
Yeah. Well, there are. I did have a friend who has since abandoned me, but she was an expert statistician. She ran over the stuff and said, "Okay, here are the probabilities that for each of these questions, and none of them is statistically significant." And I said, "Right, but the pattern seems somehow consistent. That is to say, this is more of them than you would expect do this, and more of them than you expect do that. But there is a correlation between this and that." And then there were weird things. For instance, in that population, there was a higher incidence of red hair. Now there's another prejudice for you. But a lower incidence of freckles. Matter of fact, when you re-looked at the numbers, you found that people with freckles with red hair were less likely to have freckles than people without red hair. Now go figure that one. And I'm sure they were saying, "I ain't got freckles. My cousin Lim, he's got freckles. I've got little tiny little spots." But at any rate, at the end of the day, I had a kind of feeling that the RH negative people in that population, and possibly the people in general, is number one, irrepressibly energetic. Very assertive. They'll tell you what they think right now without hesitation. Tend to be a little bit quiet, tend to be a little bit self-contained, not demonstrative. My sense is they tend to be a little bit romantic, a little bit melancholy, assertive melancholy. I guess that's a conflict there. And quite energetic. I'm Rh positive, and they all Rh negative people that I know, and from the evidence of this little survey, they're human dynamos. Now we're talking about 16%, 20% of between 15 and 20% of the population. So it's not like they're terribly remarkable, because they're a huge segment of the population. But just as a tendency, they have seem to be quite energetic, which is a jolly good thing if you want to build megaliths. That's going to take a lot of work.
Would sure go a long way towards helping prove the old saying of many hands make a lighter load, right?
Oh yeah.
Many energetic hands make an even lighter load.
Yeah, that many energetic hands, pitch in and help. But they
Matt,
remain...
did you ask a question there about religious? Is there any discernible religious distribution among Rh negative folks that you were able to discern?
Excellent question. Of course, given the geographical spread, sort of Northwest Europe, and they're off toward, and they're in Africa. A distinct, a lot fewer Buddhists and Muslims than you'd expect, just on a worldwide distribution, because it tends to be Western. Not very strongly Muslim. I would say there's probably, now that you ask, probably a higher incidence of Christians. And before I shoot my mouth off and say that doesn't count Africa, of course, one has to bear in mind that the success of the Christian missionaries in Africa has been phenomenal. They're making converts at an enormous rate, so that I don't think you can any longer say, well, the Africans are all either animists or Muslims. There's a lot of Christian Africans, and since they are recent converts, that implies a greater commitment than people are just born into it. So I'd say, I think probably Christians, and more likely Protestant than Catholic. I think that would, look at Ireland, the Northern Islands got more Rh negatives, and they're the Protestants. Southern Europe doesn't have as many Rh negatives as Northern Europe, and they tend to be Catholic. The Protestants tend to be farther north. So and the many of the missionaries, and I think most of the missions in Africa are Protestant missions. So I would say, what's your the Presbyterian cross is this cross with a little circle on it.
Right.
Over it. I saw a stone in Ireland that was in Northern Ireland, and it had some carvings on it, some ancient carvings. And apparently St. Columbo, who was a prominent early Irish Christian, he was picked, which means, northern Scotland and so forth. He had told the people, he carved a cross on it and said, okay, you people are worshiping this stone, but I'm going to carve a cross on it, and now it's okay to worship it because it's got a cross. And you look at that, just look at the stone and say, that's not true. That cross has pride of place. It is placed high and center and is larger than any of the others, and the others are kind of arranged thankfully around it. That Presbyterian cross is megalithic. That is incredibly ancient. That's what I thought at the time, and now you pump me, I say, Rh negative people to it, we're talking about a few percentage, it's not a big difference. It's not that huge, but over, millions and millions of people, I think you could find a statistical more likely Protestant,
Sure. Now, Matt, one thing that I read, and I don't know if this is an effort to tie them to the whole reptilian thing, but I read that folks that are Rh negative tend to have a lower body temperature than the rest of the population? Have you read that, or can you speculate on that at all?
Lowered body temperature. Does that mean lower blood pressure too, or just lower temperature?
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Well, I will start asking my Rh negative friends whether they tend to.
Okay.
That would go in with that doesn't work here in Florida, though, does it? Because
no, it really doesn't. There's nobody with low body temperature in Florida, that's for certain.
Yeah, and the reptiles, they don't sweat, so they got a higher body temperature than the rest of us. Right?
Oh, that's right. They would, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that lizard out on the walk, he's as hot as you'd be out there if you didn't sweat. So he's not cold-blooded. Not here. Not at this time of year.
No, not here. That's for certain. Matt, why do you think the whole mythology and the whole reptilian thing built up around Rh negative foes?
That's an excellent question. Of course, the fact that these tragic medical consequences tend to, before modern medicine, tend to scare people.
Sure.
And that might have something to do with it. For instance, in fairy lore, the fairies are supposed to have sickly babies, and they'll go steal your baby and leave one of their own sickly ones. And I look at that and I say, someone's got an Rh problem. And of course, the elves, Northern European, yeah, that's right. We're we're in Rh incompatibility central, that part of the world.
So do the leprechauns figure into that as well?
Do leprechauns abduct babies? I've never heard of that. Fairies.
The only leprechauns I've ever seen are the ones that are that are on cereal, so I'm not real sure.
Right.
And I'm Irish on both sides, so I guess I should know a little bit more about the leprechauns. I think they're very, I think a leprechaun was at the very least mischievous, and at the probably more towards the malevolent end. I think they're more like little demons.
Leprechauns?
Yes, I think leprechauns were actually your Irish version of demons, which might be redundant, right?
Well, I was once in Ireland, taking a walk with some friends. We were had gone there for a convention, and we took this hike up a hill overlooking Killarney, the beautiful southern part of the Western Ireland. And as we went up this hill, I thought I heard children laughing and playing. And as the road went up, there was it was an old dirt road we were walking along. I swear I saw a little head, small head, not tiny, like a child, peer around this rock at us and then pop back out, like a child playing. They'll take a look down the road. Oh, here comes the people. When we got to the point where he had been, it was a little recess into the mountainside, and the far side of the recess was visible at the time he stuck his head out. So you could see both edges of this U-shaped recess. We got up there, there's a pretty little glen, all grassy and green and little stones, be pleasant to sit on, and nobody there at all. And I started poking around, looking in the bushes, and my friend said, well, what are you looking for? I said, there were children playing here. He said, what? I said, didn't you see the one peek out at us? He said, nah, come on. That evening we were all having dinner, and he said, Matt saw a leprechaun this afternoon.
Was he an Irishman?
No, he was Scotch-Irish. He was Scottish, Northern Ireland.
Interesting. Well, you may have indeed had a leprechaun sighting. Just to note, Michael said that he is Rh negative, He does have a lower body temperature, and he asked, and this will have to probably be our last question, have you noted any, whether in your reading or in your little survey that you did, was there any incidence of a higher metaphysical leaning or interest in RH negative folks?
No, but you wouldn't know, because my impression is they're not really going to tell you about that sort of thing. They tend to
right.
be
But you go back to them building all these megalithic structures. Most of the time when people are building something of that nature, it does tend to have some type of a significance beyond just the physical normal world. I think that'd be safe to speculate.
What was their motivation? Well, it wasn't food, it wasn't shelter. So what were they accomplishing? And spiritual comes as right along with food and shelter is a basic human drive. So I think that's a
Absolutely.
very to say that they were temples or they were worshiping what we would recognize as gods over that kind of distance of time, I would be a stretch. But that there was a spiritual element to it, that's quite plausible. I mean,
I would definitely tend to agree with you. Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure again. You are the first repeat guest we've had on the show, so you should feel a distinct honor.
I've been most flattered, really. I am overcome.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that, folks, and my suspicion is that you did. Matt is a doctor. We used to do stand-up comedy together, he and I, so we have a really good relationship. I need to look him up. It's been many, many years since I talked to him. I wrote down his phone number there. I wrote down his name. I'll try to look up his phone number. But it'd be good to have him back on. Smart guy, interesting guy, very self-deprecating guy. You'd never know he was a doctor. He didn't even let me say he was a doctor, so I had to put doctor on there anyway. But it's fascinating information. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, don't be shy. Go ahead and share them with me. And I'll look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for another day of great web casting. You can learn a lot of stuff here, and we appreciate you being here. And we're all here to help each other unwind our minds and unindoctrinate yourself.